All right, guys, first of all, good afternoon. And I just want to thank Utah Valley as well as Mark and Tom for giving us this opportunity. When they asked us about this, we don't have a real exciting story. The business that we come from is transportation, but it's a good business. And so it is kind of an interesting story as far as being sexy and exciting and technical and all those things. There's a little bit of mixed up into that, but it's not a real exciting business per se, but it is a good business because everybody needs to move shipments from point A to point B. No matter what's going on with the economy, people still have to move things. So there's always a good opportunity there. So I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about how we got into it and what it's kind of flowed into over the last few years. So in 2002, I was working for a company by the name of Airborne Express. I don't know if any of you, has anybody ever heard of a company by the name of Airborne Express? A couple people. Airborne is a company that used to compete with FedEx and UPS. So there were three what was called integrated carriers in the marketplace. It was Federal Express, UPS, and Airborne Express. And Airborne was known as the low-cost carrier. They did about $2 billion in revenue per year, and they had big companies, General Electric, General Motors. Actually about 65% of the Fortune 500 companies shipped with Airborne Express because their rates were so low. And there's a whole interesting story to kind of what happened with them. But myself and two other guys that I had met at Airborne, we didn't work together, but we played basketball together, and we're all in different departments. One of these guys that ended up becoming my business partner, he was in operations, and he oversaw an office of about 120 union employees. Another guy was a field engineer, and so he would go all over the country and go into stations or hubs that was shipping out packages and make recommendations on how to make those stations and hubs more effective and more efficient. And then I was in sales. And so we got to know each other through playing basketball. And while working as a sales rep for Airborne Express, it was interesting because you guys probably have either sold in the past or you know people that have sold in the past. And sales is an interesting job. You can do really well in sales. You can make a lot of money, but there's a lot of rejection in sales. And so you have to have a certain type of personality to do that. And so I learned so much by being a sales rep because there's so much rejection in that particular area of a company. But to get to kind of our story where we founded United Shipping Solutions, there used to be a group of guys that would come in, two different companies that would come in, and they were called resellers of Airborne Express. And so they had their own sales organizations, their own company. They weren't employed by Airborne, but they were reselling Airborne's products and services. And so they would come in and pick up supplies and take out these supplies to the customers that they were selling. So keep in mind, Airborne had the planes, the hubs, the trucks, the big cargo trucks that needed to move things across the country. And these resellers, what they had was just an organization where they would come in and they would pick up the packages or the packaging that Airborne would provide and take it out to their customers and schedule a pickup for the customer to be picked up by Airborne Express. So they had no assets whatsoever. They were using all of the assets of Airborne Express, and then they were just an extended sales force. And that's what they were doing. And they would come in and they would pull into so we had our office in the local hub or station where all the packages were moved and shipped out of. They would pull their cars in, and it was funny because it was probably like a lot of cars that all of us drive when we're going through college. They were beat up cars, sometimes 10, 15, 20 years old, and they were really old and beat up cars, and they would come in and they would fill their trunks up with these supplies and leave. And so I worked with these companies. I was at that company for 8 years. I worked with these two companies for 8 years, and I thought, I do not have any idea how they make any kind of living doing what they're doing, because I know what Airborne's making. Airborne, like I said, would do $2 billion in revenue, and in many years they would make less than $1 million in profit. Some years, nothing. And so I knew that there was very little margin or profit involved in the business. So long story short, one of my business partners eventually left Airborne Express, or future business partners, eventually left Airborne Express and went to work for one of these companies. And he had worked for them for about 8 months, and he called me and he said, hey, you should come work here. And I go, I don't want anything to do with those guys. There's no money in that. And he goes, you are crazy. He goes, they do about $200 million a year in revenue. And of that $200 million, $60 to $65 million of it is profit. So keep in mind, the company that had the trucks, the planes, the sort centers, all the assets were making, sometimes less than $1 million a year. And this outsourced sales force was making huge profits, close to 50% some years on $200 million in revenue. And so I went to work for them. And then we recruited one other guy that worked for Airborne Express to go work for these companies. And we were there for a year, and they brought us in because they'd never had anybody that had worked with the carrier directly work for them. And so we came in and we made all of these suggestions, and they got tired of us because they said, we don't really want to do that, and that's not what we like. And in all honesty, I wouldn't have either, because what they were doing was working. And so we left that company and we started our own company that was a competitor with them, and that was United Shipping Solutions. And so that's kind of how I got to the point where I was willing to leave a stable job where I was making pretty good money. And it was a hard decision because at the time we had 2 kids and I was fairly young, and I would have never done it if I hadn't had a wife that said, if you don't do this now, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Because if you fail, you can always just go get another job. I'm much more conservative than she is. I would have never done it without her pushing me to do that. But that was good advice. It made sense to me that if this particular experience or opportunity didn't work out, I could go get another job. And so we did. We left that company and we started United Shipping Solutions. And for the first 6 months, we worked out of our houses. We didn't have any money. We didn't even really know how we were going to go about it, but we decided that we were going to franchise the concept. And so we went to work in putting together a UFOC. It's a franchise offering document or disclosure that you're required by the government to provide if you're going to sell franchises. We didn't have any money, and so we went out looking for business partners. And that's where my brother Brett came in. So we first reached out to people, family and friends and neighbors and anyone that would listen to us about trying to raise some money. Brett was working at the time. I can't remember if he was in Kentucky or New York at the time, but he was working. He'd been in the business world for a while and he'd been successful. And so we talked him and a couple other family members into investing into the company. And that gave us the money that we needed in order to go out and file these franchising documents and actually get a place of business. So where if we did sell a franchise, we could have a training place for these franchisees to come in and learn. And we could teach them the process of franchising. So that's what happened. We went out and got angel investors. We sold franchises over, we were in business for 6 years. And we started out selling franchises for about $25,000. And by the time that we were done selling franchises, we were selling them with around $50,000 to $60,000 per area. And so the way that it worked was people would buy a specific set of zip codes, and that was the area that they could sell in. They could work out of their house, or they could set up a business, a place of business and work out of there. We encouraged them to set up a place of business if they could, but not all of them had the money to do that. And it was interesting because one of the things that was interesting about that to me, you guys, was people would give us, $25,000 to $60,000 to buy these franchises. And really it was all about going out and selling, because we had built kind of an operations center where we would support them with the carrier that we worked with. And at the time it was DHL. So I mentioned that Airborne was an interesting case study. Airborne was bought out by DHL. I'm guessing that most of you have heard of DHL. So they bought Airborne out and they lasted for about 4 years. And after 4 years, they completely did away with the domestic marketplace. That the reason that they bought Airborne was because they had such a strong presence with the Fortune 500 companies and the domestic United States. But trying to merge those two companies never really worked. And so they did away with it, and they had paid billions of dollars for that company. So they literally in 4 years threw away billions of dollars and just went back to servicing international. So flying packages in and out of the US internationally. But we signed a contract with DHL to resell their services. Before they did that, it was 6 years. So we worked with them for 6 years. And in that 6-year time frame, we grew, as Tom mentioned, to about 290 franchises nationwide. I think we had franchises in every state in the country except for Wyoming and the Dakotas. And we grew to about $90 million. And like I said, we had an operations center that would work directly with the carriers. And it was a neat business because there's no assets involved. We never ever once went into debt. in this business. We never borrowed any money, and from the day that we started, we never had to go into debt because we had no assets. And so the great thing about this business is it was residual. And we would tell our franchisees that you have the ability to give yourself a raise every single day. All you have to do is go sell one more customer. So if you go out and sell one more customer every single day, it's giving yourself a raise. And so we had some franchisees, guys, that would, in that time frame, they would make, I think our top franchisee would make about $200,000 a month. And he got to that point in about 2 years. Now, he was a guy that put a whole bunch of salespeople around him. He had probably 20 to 30 salespeople. And so he was one end of the spectrum. And then we had franchisees that were their single salesperson, their single operation person. They did it all right out of their basement. But everyone that went out and grew their business, they did fairly well. We had over 40 of our franchisees that were making over $200,000 a year. So it was, when I say 290 franchises, that's total. But that was a franchise owner that would buy multiple franchises in some cases. So we really only had an ownership group of about 80 franchise owners. So half of them were close to $200,000 a year. So it was an awesome, awesome business. And then when Tom introduced us, he talked a little bit about we sold our business in 2010. That's not what happened. In 2010, it was probably one of the most traumatic experiences I've ever had in my life, because what happened was DHL decided that the Airborne experience was no longer going to work, and they were going to stop picking up and delivering in the United States. They were done with that. We did have a contract in place with a private equity group out of New York. We had an agreement signed where they were going to buy our business, but from the time we got it signed to the time that it funded, DHL announced that they were pulling out of the United States. And so we went from about $90 million in revenue, so this was all of the franchise owners, everyone and us corporately, $90 million in revenue to about 1.5 in about 2.5 weeks. And so that was a shock to the system. And it wasn't just because it was my own livelihood going out the door, but it was the livelihood of all those franchise owners as well that had relied upon us, the three of us that had kind of put that company together and founded it. And it was really, really stressful. And I know there's more stressful things in life, but as far as, how it affected family and especially the people that we worked with, I had family members, I had in-laws, I had good friends that were involved in the business, and it affected them all greatly. And so at that point, people just kind of went a lot of different directions. And we started to look for another opportunity or another way to make a living. And Brett's going to get up in a minute and talk a little bit about the franchise experience, but I want to circle back just a little bit and talk a little bit about what it was like to get that company going. So as we were working out of our homes and we didn't have a whole lot of money, it was hard because you question yourself if you're doing the right thing, and you don't know if the decision that you made was the right one, especially if you've got a family or, even if you just have to feed yourself, it's pretty stressful. And so eventually when we started to sell franchises, a lot of that pressure was taken away, and we would have monthly trainings where these franchisees would come in. And one of the things that made our company so successful was when a few of these franchise owners would start to be successful, then has anyone ever, this is a crazy question, but has anyone ever been around a herd of sheep or raised on a farm in any respect? No? There's a few of you, okay. So the interesting thing about sheep, and I think we all know this, I'm not telling you anything new, but a sheep, you can have 200 head of sheep heading down the road, and if one of them goes through a hole in the fence, all 200, every single one of those sheep will go through that hole in the fence. There's no doubt about it. If that first sheep skips that hole in the fence, all 200 will walk right by that hole in the fence. And it's interesting, and we used to kind of joke about that with franchising as well. Once you can start to show that one or a group of franchise owners can be successful, then others start to believe in that. But until you have that little bit of success at the beginning, it's really hard for others to see that vision and have that success, because initially it was hard for those first franchise owners to see that. And then some of these guys came in, like Brett and others, that were successful, and then all of a sudden it's like, Well, if they can make $10,000 a month, so can I. Well, if they can make $20,000 a month, well, so can I. And then it just kind of feeds off itself. And I know you guys have seen that in your own lives, but it is interesting because if you can if you decide to go in, and start a business in some form or fashion, if you can start to have a little bit of success, then all of a sudden that belief grows and people buy into it. And if you don't ever get that first kickstart, it's really, really difficult to get it going. So I know it's the same holds true with life. And I know you know that story, but I guess what I'm trying to get across is you got to hang in there and you got to believe that eventually you can be successful with that. So now I'll jump back to 2010 when that happened. So anyway, our franchise offering circular, just so you know, it listed that we could not dictate what our carrier partners were going to do. So we had a bunch of freight carriers that we worked with as well, but our business of that $90 million, probably 85 to 90% of it was small parcel with DHL. And so that's why it dropped so quickly. But at that particular time, there were lawsuits. We had all kinds of lawsuits thrown at us because they blamed us for the carrier deciding to leave the marketplace. And I get it. They were mad. They were frustrated. They were angry. And I guess the other, one of the other things I would like to, leave with you guys is if you set your business up, make sure that you have your paperwork in order, because I think we had something like 7 different lawsuits come at us at that point in time, and we won every single one of those lawsuits. And the reason that we won them is because our documentation and our paperwork was all legal and everything had been disclosed that needed to be disclosed. And so it's so important that if you're going to start a business or if you're going to start an endeavor with someone or become a partner of someone, I would highly recommend you don't do it based upon a handshake and what is said between you. And the reason that I say that is because I could have a discussion with you right now, and 2 weeks from now, you and I will remember it completely differently. I mean, you'll remember it one way and I'll remember it another. And neither one of us will feel like we're wrong or misleading the other one. It just happens. And so I would really encourage you to make sure that if you start a business or get into a partnership with someone, make sure that you've got your paperwork in order, because that protected us. And the other, anyway, and get good lawyers. Lawyers if you ever are in a fight or in a lawsuit, it's worth it to have people that are good, that are intelligent, that are strong. So that took us to 2010. In 2010, we kind of wound down that company and went in the process of shutting it down for lots of reasons. But and then we went out and looked for new opportunities at that time I thought, I just want to get away from this business. It's been really stressful. I want to try to go do something else. But I didn't end up doing that because it's a good business and it's residual in nature. And as long as you can keep your business going, you continue to make money every single day and every single week and month and year. And so we got back into the business and we signed a contract with the United States Postal Service. And at the time, the USPS was not known for its on-time delivery. They were not known for being reliable. And so it was a huge uphill fight, and we just kind of hung in there for a few years, and then we started to figure some things out, and we signed some channel marketing partners, and we went about it differently. We didn't go into franchising this time. We went about it differently. We hired our own internal salespeople, where we have an inside sales group, and they sell freight, and they sell small parcel. And with both companies, what we did is we created a website. It's kind of like Travelocity. If you want to go somewhere, you've got all these different choices, or Expedia, or any of those companies. We did the same thing with transportation. We created a website where people could go online from their office or from their warehouse and say, hey, show me what carriers you've got and show me the prices of all of the different carriers. And so we negotiated a contract with all of these different carriers, and they could go in and say, hey, I want to ship now. I want to ship with the USPS small parcel, or I want to ship with Yellow, or I want to ship with Roadway. And they have all these choices on their computer screen. And so they can dictate whatever carrier they want to go with. And then we've got contracts with all those different carriers. And so we started a company by the name of Intuiship. And now with Intuiship, the vast majority of our business is with the United States Postal Service. And then we also do freight as well. So we do, I don't know, several $1 million in freight, and then we do a fair amount of business with the USPS as well. But we didn't franchise this time. And so two completely different business models, but in the same industry and the same concept of having a business that's something that's residual in nature. And so that's kind of what we did from the corporate side. And now Brett's going to talk to you a little bit about what he did as a franchisee and what he thought of the business, maybe the positives, the pros and the cons to that business, and then we'll go from there. Thanks.
I'm being pulled. There we go. Does it work?
Yeah.
All right, good. So let me just start off first off. In the introductions, it sounds like I was not educated at all. It's not true. I actually went to BYU. I got my undergrad there, and I also got my MBA there. And after I did that, I thought, I'm going to go into the corporate world, and I'm going to make my career kind of in the corporate ladder and work my way up and do all that kind of stuff. So I did that for almost 15, 20 years. I worked in healthcare, and I work for companies now. You might recognize Humana and Prudential and WellPoint in California, if you're from California. So I did that, and I realized that the further up the ladder you go, there's always someone higher in the ladder making a decision that can totally affect the next thing you do the next day. So I would have teams of people working on new products and marketing plans and stuff like that. And then suddenly someone would come in from a higher level and say, we don't want to do that anymore. Everything you just worked on for the past 6 months to a year, it doesn't matter, it's gone, right? So thanks very much, but now start doing this, which can be really frustrating. And it's probably why you guys are in entrepreneurship right now. Probably have a desire to kind of have some control over what you do and the outcome of what you do. So anyway, I was working my way up the ladder. One day, our company got bought by Aetna, and within, I think 2 months later, my whole department was gone. So I was out of a job, and I didn't know what to do. And I thought, well, I got some money. I really don't have to work right now. And I'd always wanted to write screenplays. So I went to NYU, and I got my certificate in screenwriting at NYU. And I spent 2 years writing screenplays. So you haven't seen any of them yet, trust me, or else I wouldn't be here right now. But maybe one day. One of them was a semifinalist in the Oscar screenwriting competition. So you never know. I still have them in a drawer somewhere. I wrote 6 or 7. And that one did pretty well. So maybe one day that might work. But after 2 years, I realized, okay, all that money I thought I'd saved, it's not replicating, right? So I probably should start making some more money versus using all of my income, my retirement money. So Rob at that time came to me and he said, hey, we've got this idea and we'd like you to consider it and maybe fund it. So the smart thing about my brother Rob is they didn't use any of their own money to start their company. You didn't put a penny in, right?
Of course we did.
No, you did.
We lived off we lived off our own savings, but we didn't invest in the company, to his point.
Right.
Yeah.
So they were smart enough to go out and find people to invest in your idea. So one of my recommendations is if you have an idea and it's a really well-documented, well-founded idea, go find people to invest in it, okay? That way you can use your resources in other ways if you need to. Okay, so that was smart on their part. So anyway, I thought it was a great idea. My father thought it was a good idea. I think 5 or 6 other people thought it was a really good idea. So we put some money into that. And they started to grow the business as he explained. About 6 months to a year later, while I was writing my screenplays, he came back to me and he said, hey, we're willing to give you an offer. For the money that you put in, we'll let you keep the ownership in the company, but we'll use that money and you can apply it towards franchises. And so I said, okay, well, I have to earn some money. You know, it's a totally different career. I'd never done sales before, per se. But I thought, why not try it? So I picked the franchises in Manhattan, New York, because that's where I was living at the time, Manhattan. So I bought, I think it was 6 or 8 franchises in Manhattan. And then a year or two later, I bought the LA franchises as well. So what that meant, it sounds great. You're a franchise owner, you're an entrepreneur, you've got all this capability to do everything you want. But I didn't have any employees, and I didn't have any money coming in. So how that business works is companies don't come to you. You don't put up a storefront. You know, you're not building business that way. You actually have to go find your customers. So imagine me at about 40 years of age, going into buildings in New York City and just knocking door to door to door of businesses saying, hey, who do you ship with and would you consider shipping with USS? So that was kind of a shock because I'd been in the corporate world, corner offices, I actually watched the World Trade Centers fall from my office window. I mean, I was there, right, in the corporate world, seeing all that kind of stuff, and now I was asked to go out and be the grunt, knocking on doors, asking people to try to listen to me, okay? It was kind of humbling, but to tell you the truth, it's actually kind of fun. So if any of you guys have been missionaries for a church, I hated the first 2 or 3 doors we knocked on. But after those first 2 or 3 doors, it actually became kind of fun. And every morning it was the same thing. Knocking on those first 2 or 3 doors was a pain to do it. But once I got past the 2 or 3, it almost became a game. Who could I get to talk to me, and how could I get them to want to do business with me? So within a year or 2 of doing that by myself, I had started getting enough resources and money, I could hire some employees. So by the time the demise of DHL leaving US, I think we had about, I forget, 8 or 10 employees working for us. And we just opened up an LA office. We were trying to expand down in LA as well and all that kind of stuff. And then just like he was about to sell the company, we were going to sell part of our company too, our franchises. So we had a deal in the works that would have been for several $1 million. The guy was supposed to talk to USS that day, that morning, that DHL announced they were leaving the US. So that kind of fell apart. So we became part of that lawsuit as well. And we sued DHL. And that's how I'm living here today, right? We won our lawsuit. And DHL has a lot of money. So anyway, so that was my perspective. I had gone to the entire corporate environment. It's great for the very few people that make it to the very top, but it can be really, really frustrating if you're just a cog doing daily tasks that suddenly don't mean anything the next day. So entrepreneurship, I will say, I never planned to go into it. I really didn't. But I'm really, really glad that I was given the opportunity to kind of do it. I learned from it. It is really, really great to kind of have your own business, your own freedom. Any day I wanted to take off, I could. Any day that I wanted to work extra long, I could as well. It has its challenges, especially when you have to pay your own salary or someone else's salary. So all those things kind of go with it. But ultimately, I think I would highly recommend that you consider it strongly. That's why you're here. So it's been really good for me. And I think with that, that's it. Questions and answers, I guess. Is that right? Okay.
Okay, we have to pass the mic around. We got another one here, so.
Oh, okay.
For questions in there.
While we're doing that, can I just talk a little bit more about that a little bit? Sure. So just as you guys are getting ready to ask your questions, one thing, that Brett touched on was the aspect of going out and knocking on doors. There's so many things you learn in sales. I would encourage everybody. I know some of you just don't have that personality. I totally get it. But if you get a chance to be a salesman for just a little while, just to get that experience, it helps you in so many different ways. So maybe that you don't make it your career, but there's a lot of things to be learned by trying to sell something, whatever it is. I highly recommend it because there's great lessons to be learned there.
And to add to that, it's just not selling for yourself. If you guys take corporate jobs, you're constantly selling ideas. Everything you do is a sales thing. So I agree with him. Sales will help you kind of learn how to do that. Okay, questions?
Is this on? Yeah, okay. I apologize ahead of time. My question's a little bit complex and a little long-winded, so if you could just bear with me for a second. When I go to Expedia or Travelocity as a website, and they say, oh, you can go to the Bahamas at this hotel or at this hotel, or with this plane carrier and this plane carrier, this changes your price and this changes your price. These different options mix and match to create a different bottom line for the product that I want to purchase. Now I can look at those hotels and I can see, that seaside view is great, or they're in a good neighborhood, or they've got 5 stars, or blah, 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 blah. When I go to you guys, you mentioned a website that's similar to that for carriers. Mm-hmm. So carriers don't often translate well to at the consumer level the value-added activities that they provide that justify an increase of cost for the exact same delivery standards. Mm-hmm. For example, if I want to send a package to USPS and I want to send a package to FedEx, I want it to go roughly the same kind of way by car or by plane, and I want it to arrive roughly the same amount of time. Those are 2 really, really different price points as a consumer. And you guys, in the business, when you create these partnerships, I imagine you're able to see and understand the value-added activities that FedEx might offer that USPS doesn't. You know, our employees are a little bit better paid, so they're less likely to kick your box. Our facilities are a little bit cleaner, so it's less likely to arrive, your box is less likely to arrive, you know, covered in goo or dripping or something along those lines. How do you translate that to the consumer through your website, that value-added activity? Because someone's going to see that, and they're going to say, oh, well, the delivery standard's the same. It's going to arrive in 17 days with both carriers, and this guy's $12 less, and this guy's $12 more. Why would I ever pick the $12 more? How do you translate value-added activities at the consumer level that help your partners?
That's a good question.
Sorry, it's long-winded.
No, it's a good question because it's so funny because the carriers ask that as well, you know, and customers want to know that all of the time. Typically, the benefit to that website are for customers that are familiar with carriers already and they like a carrier for one reason or another. But the one thing that we try to do with our franchise, with the franchise owners, and that we try to do now with our sales guys, that our direct sales guys, is the value that we provide to that customer before he gets to that website is to try to educate him on why the USPS may be a benefit to them outside of the cost. Or why, you know, roadway is better than yellow. Why those carriers, there is a difference. That's the benefit that our sales guys can provide to that particular customer. But you hit on it. At the end of the day, guys, in transportation and in shipping, there's not much of a difference. And it almost always comes down to cost. I mean, FedEx is, it kind of blows my mind actually that FedEx is in business because they do such a phenomenal job of marketing themselves as never having anything late. They are great, but you know what? Their late percentages are almost identical to what UPS's are. And the USPS now is within a percentage point of their on-time percentage with Federal Express. So FedEx is just a little bit better, but they'll charge a third to a half more than the USPS will charge. So your question's valid and it's a good one. And at the end of the day, really the only value is like, some of those carriers do a better job in this. In most cases, if there's a return or there's a late delivery, as far as their customer service goes, but those bigger carriers, they're all pretty good at it. But and it almost always comes down to cost. That's really what it comes down to.
And I'll add, DHL at the time really was probably subpar.
Yeah.
Their delivery, their on-time delivery was much less than UPS or FedEx. And a lot of times the drivers were not paid as well. And therefore, they were tired of the job and they just skipped companies. They wouldn't pick up their packages, which was extremely frustrating for us to try to maintain our customer base. So our customers would call us furious and we'd say, don't worry. We would walk over. In New York, we had to walk or take a taxi. We didn't have a car, right? So we'd walk 12 blocks, pick up their packages somehow, put them in a taxi, drive them down to the distribution center. So we try to add that value added as a business owner, which whatever business you guys start, you'll probably have to find a way to differentiate one way or another. And for us, that was doing that.
Does that answer your question? Not really?
It boils down to customer service.
Yeah.
For a lot of stuff, yeah. It's just, we can talk about it afterwards. I don't want to take up other people's questions.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to. Any other questions, guys?
Okay, you made on this side.
Yeah, so I'm in a business right now. My partner is my brother, who I grew up with and I know very well, so I know how to deal with certain situations with him, and it's worked great. We've never been closer. But I'm in the process of maybe starting a new business with my brother-in-law, who I did not grow up with. And I'm sure we'll run into much bigger issues because we don't know how to communicate as well as my brother and I do. So you started a business with people that you didn't grow up with. What things did you do to avoid conflict in the future? Like, did you have any kind of agreement to start with, any kind of contracts?
Yeah, good question. Do you have an operating agreement with your brother?
No, I don't.
Do you know what an operating agreement is?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I would recommend even with your brother as well as your brother-in-law, because inevitably, I know you guys might have the best relationship that you can possibly have, you and your brother, but at some point, I'm guessing there will be a disagreement on how things are handled or how things need to be handled. And so the advice that we got from people that had been down this road before was put an operating agreement in place, and that solves your issues. Because you know, when there's a disagreement, you go to the operating agreement and you say, this is how this particular issue is resolved, and you resolve it, and you may not like the resolution, or he may not, but you've agreed to it beforehand. And so I would get an operating agreement in place with both of them, and it just makes it easier, and it prevents, you know, big arguments down the road. Brett, do you have anything to add?
Yeah. Also, you guys might be the best of brothers, but your spouses may not like each other, right? And spouses can do a lot. They can do a lot to harm a business, or change a business, or put little thoughts in your mind that you may not have thought if you were just working solely with your brothers. So I totally agree with Rob. Get an operating agreement in everything you do. And also document conversations. Like just summarize it in an email. Say, hey, just to let you know, just summarize our discussion today, we're going to do this and this and this, and we'll distribute funds this and this and this way. Because as Rob suggested, you will forget, and everybody remembers it differently. So, yeah.
So my question is, getting your company started and everything, you guys come from different backgrounds. How did you create and how did you get people to invest, or like, what was the documentation you did, or just the layout of getting investors?
Okay, that's a really good question too, because the way that we got investors was there was already a proven concept with what we had done. There were already 2 companies out there doing it, you know, and so we just tried to make it a little bit different. And really, at the end of the day, it wasn't much different. It was just, you know, it was a similar concept, a similar process, but the way that we got investors is we were excited about our business. We knew that it had potential, and we all have different personalities. Some of our personalities are laid back, some of our personalities are not so laid back. But I would recommend that when you're getting ready to talk to people about investing, if your personality is not this way, get someone that can be really excited about your business to represent it to potential investors. Because you guys know this, enthusiasm is contagious. And if you believe in it, or the person that you're working with really believes in it, and you're selling it and you're presenting it to someone else, the opportunity, they'll get excited about it. There's great opportunities that way. So anyway, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, good.